Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first of many TrackMan webinars. I'm Jens Horneman, the Global Director of Marketing and Communications at TrackMan. We intend to launch different series of webinars from this one, which is part of a product feature series, to other series like asking a select group of TrackMan users to share their experience on how they use their TrackMan in their daily teachings. Just a small word on how on our thoughts and reasons behind using the webinar format. In order for us to reach a large audience spanning several continents like you do in an effective manner, we thought this format might work well. We would therefore be very grateful if you would send us your feedback once this webinar is over. It's very easy. We'll record this webinar and send it to you right after the session has ended. And in this mail, you will be able to express your thoughts and ideas. Please help us get better. Thank you. Before we begin, some practicalities about the webinar. We estimate it to last for approximately 1 hour, including Q&A sessions. During the presentation, you can enter your questions in the lower left corner of your screen called Chat. We will then read, sort, and answer them during the call. With no further ado, I'll leave the word to our today's presenter, Justin Patchen, a TrackMan veteran and a product specialist who will take you through the basic functionalities and some examples of the Optimizer feature. Thank you. Justin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Like Jens said, this is the first webinar that we're trying out here. So if we run into any small technical difficulties, we apologize in advance. But this first webinar is just an introduction to the TrackMan Optimizer. And so I'm going to talk about the features available, describe how it works, and then look at some real-world examples. At the end of the presentation, we will try and answer some of the questions that you write into the chat. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a quick poll. So if everybody wants to see the question, just go ahead and answer the question, and then we'll get started right after that. All right, that's great. Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. And what I want to do first is just give a little background on the history. If some of you have been with TrackMan for a while as customers, then you may remember the old TrackMan Pro, TrackMan Launch software. So we actually introduced a driver fitting software back in May of 2007. And this was probably one of the first ones available on the market that we called driver fitting. So basically it only looked at drivers, and you could do some different features with it, but just wanted to kind of bring that up and talk about where we've come from there. And so one of the really important things that happened when we released that driver fitting software is we introduced attack angle as a KPI. And so this was really new to the industry, and we started talking about how different attack angles can allow you to hit at different distances. So if we look at part of the chart here, if you're looking at a 90-mile-per-hour club speed, going from a -5 attack angle to a +5 attack angle had the potential to increase your distance by 24 yards. And so that was a big thing. And what that did was that merged fitting and teaching. And so we were able to prove that, through club fitting, you can make some changes up and down kind of this corridor here. But if you really wanted to make big changes in what was going on, you had to introduce some instruction as far as changing people's attack angle, and later what we found out, changing people's spin loft. And so moving somebody from a -5 attack angle to a +5 attack angle is not likely at all to happen through equipment. So that's where the instruction comes involved. But you were able to kind of tweak people's clubs and get them in the best area possible for whatever their attack angle was. So that's kind of where we started at. Just want to give you a brief background in case you were unaware of that. In a second, we're going to talk about an overview of the product's features as they stand today. But first, we have just one more quick little survey, if you can answer this for us. All right, that's great. So, spring of 2014, we kind of reintroduced our driver fitting, and then we made some additions to it. So in TPS version 3.1, that's where we first reintroduced the TrackMan Optimizer, and it's part of just the shot analysis feature. And so one of the big differences here as far as the driver goes is that now we've added a third option. So before, back in the day, you could optimize for max carry and max total, but now you're also able to optimize for something that falls in the middle, a combination of carry and total. And so you'll find that in the top left-hand corner of the software whenever a driver is selected. So the software needs to see a driver selected as a club in order for this particular drop-down to be available to you. And we're going to talk about why that's important. And so the big things about the optimizer and really how it works, and when you start seeing the green shaded area come up as far as carry distance goes or total distance goes, is there's two things that we're really looking at. One, it has to fall within the height limits that we've set for that trajectory, and two is the distance limits that we've set for that trajectory. So if it fits into both height and distance, then you're going to get a green. So that, you may have spin rate that doesn't fall in the green, you may have launch angle that doesn't fall in the green, you may have ball speed that possibly doesn't fall in the green. But as long as it fits inside height and distance, then you're going to get that green shaded area to pop up. And so just so that you know, that's what that green is based off of, is the height and distance. And so when you're talking about driver, just as it used to be in the old software, if you're looking at optimizing for carry, then it's going to optimize so that you get the longest carry distance possible, which means you're going to get a little bit shorter total distance. Of course, real world, it's going to depend on the conditions and what the ground is like in your area, but in all practicality, you're probably going to get a little bit shorter total distance than what the total distance optimization is going to be. So longest carry, a little shorter total distance, you're going to get a higher max height, which is going to generate a steeper landing angle, which is why you're probably not going to get as far of a total distance. And then if we go over to the other one that we used to have, as far as maximizing for total distance, you're going to get a little bit shorter carry, so it's not going to carry quite as far as if you optimize for carry. So a little shorter carry, but it's going to come in lower and flatter, which is going to allow it to bounce and roll further. So you would expect the longest total to be when you optimize for total. And then again, like I mentioned before, we've added a new choice, which is going to be for carry and total. And then this is just going to fit right down the middle. So it's not going to be the longest carry. It's not going to be as short as total. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, as well as all these other data parameters are going to fall somewhere in the middle between those two. And so which one you choose is really up to you. My personal preference is I like the carry and total. That's kind of why I asked for it. But by all means, depending on who the player is and the conditions that they're under, you may choose to optimize for carry, or you may choose to optimize for total. It's completely up to you, and then what the player is looking to optimize for, really. And so next, this was a big addition for the optimizer software this time around, was the ability to optimize for every other club in the bag. So now with your woods, your hybrids, and your irons, you can also create optimal trajectories. And so when you select either a fairway wood, a hybrid, or an iron, or even a wedge, then you're going to get this drop down available to you, which is going to allow you to select between a low, a mid, and a high trajectory. And so we'll talk about where those trajectories came from. But if you have a wood, a hybrid, or an iron, you're going to be able to select low, mid, or high. And so what does that mean? Well, the high trajectory is going to have a little shorter carry distance, but it's going to have a higher apex and a steeper landing angle. So for somebody that's more concerned about having the ball stop quickly on the greens, you may want to fit them for a high trajectory. On the other end of the scale, you've got the low trajectory. So that's going to be a lower and flatter shot, so it's going to carry further, but it's going to come in flatter or with a shallower landing angle, which is going to make it release more. And then mid trajectory, again, is going to be right in the middle of those. So again, it depends on the student, depends on the conditions that they're playing in and what you're trying to achieve. but you're able to select between a high trajectory, mid trajectory, or low trajectory, depending on what you want to get out of it. And then, as I mentioned, you can also optimize for wedges. And so what happens when you have a wedge selected as the club is that you actually get one more drop down. And for the wedges, we actually allow you to be able to optimize depending on if it's a full swing shot or a pitch shot or what we would consider a partial shot. So if it's just a normal full swing shot, then you'd want to select full swing here. If it's anything other than a full swing, then you may want to select pitch. You can kind of play around with this and see what you like the best, but in general, just so that you're aware, if you select a pitch shot, it's basically going to be a little lower trajectory. So we collected data from a lot of different tour players and had them hit full swing shots and then pitch shots or partial wedge shots. And what we found out was that in general, those players hit those partial wedge shots lower and usually with a little bit more spin. So generally, you're going to see a little bit lower launch angle and a little bit higher spin rate, and usually a little bit lower height when you're dealing with a tour player that's hitting a partial wedge shot. Now, that doesn't mean that every tour player does it that way, but that's what we found from the sample that we took. So with the wedges, you can again select between a low, mid, and high trajectory, but then you can also select between a full swing or a partial wedge shot. And same as the wood, hybrid, and iron optimization, it holds true for the wedges as well. If you're choosing the high trajectory, then it's going to carry a little bit shorter, but it's going to have a higher max height and a steeper landing angle. If you want to hit something kind of a low spinner type shot in there, then maybe you're going more for a low trajectory optimization where it's going to carry a little bit longer. It's going to come in a little lower and a little flatter, and then it's going to bounce and roll a little bit more, or release a little bit more on the green. And then obviously the mid trajectory is right in the middle again. So when you're choosing high, mid, and low trajectory with the wedge, it's going to behave the same way as if it was a wood, hybrid, or iron. And then finally, as far as some of the features go for the optimizer, you can either select a single shot. So when you have your shot list on the left-hand side, you can either go up to the top and select a single shot and optimize for that single shot, or you can also go down in the bottom left-hand corner and click on one of the groups, and then it will use the averages for all of those shots and then create an optimization based off of that. So again, depending on the situation, sometimes you may want to use the averages, but there could be other situations where you only want to use a single shot. In particular with the driver, we'll talk about this in a second, but if somebody has a negative attack angle and you're working on getting them to hit more up on it, if they finally do get that one shot where they hit up on it, then you can go in and you can select that one single shot where they had a positive attack angle or a better attack angle, and then show them what's possible based off of that one shot. If you're doing maybe iron fitting with somebody, then you may want to look at more of the averages of a couple shots. So again, up to you, but just so that you have that option to do either a single shot or a group of shots. And then lastly is that it is also available on the TrackMan app now. So if you have the TrackMan 3E, the wireless radar, and you're using the TrackMan app, if you have the newest app available in the App Store, then you also have the optimizer feature that's now built into that software. So that's something that only happened probably about less than a month ago, but that is a new feature that is available also on the app. All right, so now we're going to talk about how it works. I got one more survey question coming up for you. And this is a multiple selection, so if you can just kind of select all the ones that you have used the optimizer for. All right, thanks guys. All right, so now how it works. So we're going to talk a little bit about a little behind the scenes types information about what's going on and how did we come to the conclusions that we came to. So a few important things that you really need to keep in mind when you're using the TrackMan Optimizer. You need to make sure that you go into your TPS settings and make sure that you have the right settings selected within the settings. In particular, ball conversion and normalization are used as part of the optimizer feature. So what does that mean? Well, first, that means that you need to make sure that you're picking the best fit for the ball that you're using. So if you're to range using a range ball, you need to find out which bucket that ball falls into, and you can contact support here and let us know what type of ball that you have and maybe take some pictures of the ball so we can see the markings, and then we can kind of help you figure out which category that your ball is going to fall into. And so we have these buckets that help with our ball conversion, and we'll probably end up doing a webinar simply on ball conversion and normalization at some point, just because I know that there are some questions out there about that. But it's important to make sure, if you're using a premium ball, a Pro V1 type ball, select premium. If you have a type of range ball, then it could be medium or whatever the case is, but you do need to make sure that you're selecting the correct ball because the optimizer does take that into account. And then also within the settings is make sure that you're putting in the correct conditions. It is going to use normalization. So every time that you turn on the optimizer, it's automatically going to turn on normalization. And normalization is going to use the altitude and temperature that you have set in your settings. And what I would probably recommend is that, when you're working with somebody, set these at the average conditions the golfer will play in. So if it's somebody that's coming to work with you and you're in Florida, yet they live in Denver year round, then you may want to go in there and change this so that the altitude reflects where they live. But it is going to use this, and then as you change these numbers, it is going to have some small effects on what the optimizer spits out as far as the numbers. If you're going up from 0 feet to 5,000 feet, then you could see some pretty big changes in what the optimizer says. So make sure that you set the ball, make sure that you set the conditions, and then you'll be in good shape. So now if we go a little bit further behind the scenes, a lot of questions have come up about kind of how the optimizer works. And this is just a sample of some of the things that goes into it. But it is really important that you're also selecting the correct club. So if the person's hitting a 6-iron, then we need to know that it's a 6-iron because we do have to make some assumptions. We have to make some assumptions about what the loft of a 6-iron is and what the weight of a 6-iron is and where the CG is, what the friction of a 6-iron is, COR, trampoline effect of a 6-iron or a driver or a hybrid, all of those things. So, obviously there's some variations between all the clubs out there, and the model will accept some of that variation. But, if you put in a 6-iron, but they're really hitting a 9-iron, that loft and that weight of that club head is going to be so much different that it is going to affect what our optimizer says. So, there are things that we have to assume and make some predictions on as far as what the clubs are. And so what we've done is we've tried to do the best we can of doing research in the market and just kind of looking at what the averages out there are for the different major manufacturers. What's the average loft of a 6-iron? And again, I know that can vary by a few degrees, which the model allows for. But if you have a club that's been bent really strong or some strange model that has something loft-wise that's a lot different, if it says 6-iron, but you know that it's really more like a 5-iron as far as other major manufacturers go, you may want to try and play around with it and change the club to a 5-iron just to see how it behaves if you're having any problems. But putting in the correct club is definitely an important part of the optimizer process. Another important thing is understanding that we have to assume that you're making centered contact. So we're kind of taking out any gear effect that might be happening, and we'll look at some examples of how that can show up in the data. But it is important to know that we are having to assume that you're making solid contact. So we'll look at that here in just a little bit. So now, if we start breaking this down, let's talk about the driver first. The driver needs both club speed and attack angle in order to calculate the optimals. So we have to have both of these things in order for the optimizer to work for the driver. All right, so this is only for the driver that we need club speed and attack angle. And if we look at why that is, we look at max carry here. and we look at the old fitting chart that we've had around for a few years and the knowledge that we've gained over the years, we know that as you start hitting more and more up on it, that your potential increases. So if you start at -5 and you go up to +5, you're going to be able to have the potential to hit it further. Well, it doesn't just stop at +5. It keeps going. And so, if you look at what the T height is, 4-inch T height, the maximum attack angle would be around about a +14 is approximately the max that you'd be able to get if you barely pegged it up and got the most attack angle that you possibly could. Well, what we have to do is we have to hold what your club speed and your attack angle are constant, because otherwise we would be telling everybody to hit up on it 14 degrees. And we know that that's not always realistic and improbable in most cases. So what we do with the driver, because somebody can hit either down on it, flat, or up on it, we have to hold that attack angle and that club speed constant and then say, based off of your current swing, what is possible? But that's where I was talking about earlier, that if you can get that person just to hit one shot where they're hitting up on it, then you can go in and select that single shot, and it's going to look at the club speed and attack angle for that single shot and then show you what the optimal values are or potential values are for that person. So this allows you to use the optimizer for the driver, and even though they may hit down on it and even though it's using the person's attack angle, you can find that one shot and then select that shot to see what the numbers come out as. Now, if we're looking at all the other clubs in the bag, including the fairway woods, including the hybrids, the irons, the wedges, everything else, the only thing that we need is club speed. So we don't need to measure anything else other than club speed if you're using one of those other clubs. And a big part of that reason is because you are hitting down on it, or should be hitting down on it when it's on the ground. So because we know that the attack angle shouldn't ever be positive, then we can start making calculations simply based off of what club speed is. And if we start to look at that and how that actually works, first off, we've taken data from the best players in the world. We've taken all the data that we've got from the PGA Tour, from the LPGA Tour, so we've got a lot of different club speeds in there, and we've looked at what those players do. We've looked at what their high trajectories are, we've looked at what their low trajectories are, and then kind of what the averages are. And we've looked at that for both of those groups and all the club speeds that we have. And then we've moved that across all club speeds that are possible. And so, we've been able to use that data and come up with some ideas of what a high trajectory is, what a low trajectory is, and what a mid trajectory is. We've at some point we had to make a decision on what we want to say is a high trajectory. So, we base that off of all this Tour Pro data, and we've said that, this is high. Again, doesn't mean that there aren't people out on tour that don't hit it higher than what the high trajectory says. There probably are people that hit it higher than what the high trajectory says. But if you look at kind of the averages and then the other groups of people that fall outside the averages, where do they fall? And then how does that fit into a higher or a lower trajectory? So if we start there and we say that we have all the different club speeds out there, and we've come up with these low, mid, and high trajectories for all of those club speeds, then we can start to work backwards. And so we go from the trajectory, and now we know, well, to create that trajectory, because we're using normalization, because we're doing it under calm conditions, and because we're doing it at a certain temperature and a certain altitude, we know now that in order to create a high trajectory at a 95 mile per hour club speed, that we need a certain ball speed, launch angle, and spin rate in order to create that high trajectory. Same thing with the low trajectory at that same club speed. We need a ball speed, a launch angle, and a spin rate in order to create that trajectory. Well, where do we get that ball speed, launch angle, and spin rate from? We get it from the spin loft and the club speed. So when you put something into it, you're going to get something out of it. So based off the club speed and based off of how that person delivers the club head, one quick note here is that we're assuming a zero face to path on all of these, so we're just assuming a straight shot on all these. So if we assume that, then we know to look for a certain spin loft in order to create a certain launch angle and then a certain spin rate. And so based off of all that, that's why we don't really need to know what the attack angle is or what the dynamic loft is. We can tell you what that needs to be without seeing it based off the trajectories that we've come up with. And so that's why we don't need any of the club delivery information to give you that information or those optimal values with all those other clubs, because one, we know that you're hitting down on it or should be hitting down on it. And then two, in order to create a certain trajectory, you've got to put a certain club speed and a certain impact parameter into that to get out that launch angle, ball speed, and spin rate, which is going to create the trajectory that we're looking for. So that's a little bit of a behind the scenes look at how it works, how we came to that. We'll say that we're still tweaking it. I mean, we feel really, really good about all the driver stuff, all the iron stuff. I know there's been some questions out there about the wedges and about the hybrids. We don't have as much data on the hybrids and wedges with some of the players, but we feel like we're in a pretty good spot there. And also there's probably more variation in the clubs with the hybrids between different manufacturers out there. So you may see the model continue to be tweaked a little bit, but we feel like it's in a pretty good spot right now. So if I can go ahead and get everybody to answer this final survey question for us, then we'll go ahead and look into some different examples. All right, thanks for that final answer there. It was interesting to see that we actually have a lot of, I would say, newbies here to the TrackMan Optimizer. So it's good to see that learning a little bit about how it works, and hopefully these upcoming examples will give you an idea of how you'll be able to put it into practice moving forward. So first off, I'm going to start with what I would consider a club fitting example. So we had somebody here at the office. We just grabbed 3 of the clubs that we had lying around, and these were all 7-irons. And he's a 26-year-old male golfer, 6 handicap, so he's a pretty good golfer. And we just had him test these 3 different clubs. One of the clubs was actually his club, and then 2 of the other clubs were just clubs that were lying around the office. So again, all 7-irons. We had him hit 3 shots with each, and then we just took the 2 best shots to analyze. So if we start with the first one here, this was kind of a lower cost model, you could say. It's not a recognized name brand or anything. Had a graphite shaft in it. It was actually a 1/2 inch shorter than the other 2 clubs. It had just a R-Flex, nothing special at all about this club, just lower price model type golf club that somebody may be using. So we had him hit a couple shots, and first thing you could see was everything was way out to the right. You'll see the other shots as well, which were much better. So it was interesting that he had a really tough time getting this squared up or whatever the case was that made the ball shoot off way to the right on him. And so if we look, what's the important thing that we talked about? Well, we talked about that the only thing we really need here is the club speed. And based off of this club speed and based off the 7-iron and how the model works, then it's going to tell you where your attack angle should be. It's going to tell you where your spin loft should be. And then based off of those things, you'd start to expect to see these others fall in line. So, if we look at his attack angle was pretty good. I mean, it was right in the green area of where it should be based off of his club speed and hitting a 7-iron and wanting a mid trajectory. Then if we look at his spin loft, really high spin loft here relative to what we're looking at. So we're looking for something around kind of a 27.5 type number maybe. He's all the way up at 33.5. So what does that do? Well, when spin loft is high, generally you're going to expect ball speed to be low. You're not creating as much compression, and if we expect or the optimal value of a spin loft is in this area, then that spin loft and a solid strike should generate this type of ball speed here. But since his spin loft was too high, then it was more of a glancing blow and his ball speed was low. And then another thing we can look at and we can deduce here is that because his spin loft was high, but his attack angle was good, it basically means that his dynamic loft was high with this club. Because we know his attack angle is good, the other part of spin loft is dynamic loft, so the dynamic loft must have been high. Well, we know that the ball launches closer to the dynamic loft than it does the attack angle, so we would expect a higher launch angle here, and that's what we get. So high spin loft, high launch angle. High spin loft, you'd also expect is going to generate a higher spin rate. So everything really kind of matches up with what you'd expect based off of, one, his attack angle, his club speed, and his spin loft when you compare them to what those optimal values are. So again, high spin loft, generally you're going to expect to see a high launch angle and a high spin rate. So it fell a little bit short here. Even though the height was in the green area, it didn't quite make it to the green area for the carry, 147 versus 158, and so that's why this is not green here. Go to the next example. So this was just a blade club, standard length, R300 shaft. We look at it. It was interesting that his club speed jumped up to 86 miles per hour with this club. We talked about the other one being shorter. I don't know the weighting of the other club. I don't know the swing weight or the overall weight. We don't have that here to measure with, but just interesting that it jumped up to 86 miles per hour. We look, his attack angle got a little bit shallower with this club. It's still pretty close to the green area, but just a little bit shallower than what we would say would be optimal to create this mid trajectory again. Ball speed's a little bit lower than what we would expect. Well, he is a 6 handicap, but it is a blade club and may be difficult to hit that, center where you're going to get maximum ball speed or get the best smash factor. So that could be possibly one of the reasons here. Launch angle is just on the high side. Spin rate, in the green area here. Height's okay as well. So, nothing too crazy, but I would say the biggest thing that sticks out to me is the fact that we are getting a low ball speed here compared to what we would expect, which is affecting his carry distance. Again, within the height parameters here, so that one checks out okay, but not within the carry parameters, so we don't get green here. We'll go to the third club that he hit, the AP2. This one looks pretty good here. His speed is very similar as what it was to the blade club. Attack angle got a touch steeper again, just a little bit more than a degree and a half difference from the blade, and closer to what the big cavity back was. Spin loft looks really good. Ball speed looks really good. Launch angle looks really good. Spin rate is a little bit low. Now, why exactly would that be? Again, different clubs have different properties. Balls, we were using a Pro V1, but it's not much below what the numbers are. It is definitely some. I mean, we're talking almost 1,000. So that may be where you play around with different balls or different things to see if you really want to get that spin rate up. But overall, he's pretty good. His height's right in the center here, and it carries 171. We're saying that the optimal is 169. So it does carry a little bit further than the optimal, but again, we're using some of those club parameters. We're saying that a 7-iron has a certain COR, spring-like effect, that it has a certain weight, a certain loft. So, is this 7-iron 1 degree stronger than what a normal 7-iron would be? Or does it have a little bit more spring-like effect than what our normal 7-iron would be? All those things can play a little bit of a part into how these numbers can change a little bit. So that's why you may sometimes see a carry number that shows up slightly longer than what we have listed here. We don't know the club properties of every single club out there, and we are putting them into kind of buckets. So, it may not always be spot on 169, but that's why we have kind of this plus minus scale of the green shaded area over here. And so if we do a little recap, we had 80 mile per hour club speed, 86 and 86. The only one that fell in the green was actually his club. That's actually the club that he plays with, so it's pretty good to know that the club that he plays with fits him quite well. We talked a little bit about how all we need to know is club speed. Well, it's interesting that these are all 7-irons. His club speed's basically the exact same, yet it's saying that he should be able to hit this one 6 yards further than what the blade is. Now, why is that? Well, again, like I said, we have the model, and it's going to adjust slightly depending on what it sees. So, different clubs, it's going to allow for slightly different lofts between 7-irons or slightly different CORs or different things like that. So, there is some wiggle room within the model that it's going to try and do the best to learn based off the information that's being put in. So, it saw that it was getting higher ball speeds than what was expected, and so it kind of adjusted that based off of that. So that's why this optimal is a little bit higher than this optimal, even though the club speeds are the same. So you really just have to kind of use the optimal values and what it's telling you, and then work from there. It's going to do a really good job of calculating what is optimal based off of that person's club speed, and then after seeing a few shots with that club, kind of tweaking it and narrowing it down to what it is with that club without even knowing exactly what that club is. So now if we look at a different iron optimization, I would look at this as more of a technique type situation. So if we look at it, I went ahead and tried to optimize for high trajectory. So let's just say that this person wants to hit a high trajectory because they do hit their 7-iron a little bit shorter, and maybe they want the ball to stop on the green a little bit more just because it is going to come in flatter when you don't have as much club speed. So we want to try and get the ball a little higher. We want it to come down a little softer for this person. It may not be the case always for a lower club speed person, but we're just going to use that in this situation. So for a high trajectory, really good attack angle, low spin loft, high ball speed. So again, you have a low spin loft, just the opposite of what we saw before. Low spin loft, more compression, you would expect a higher ball speed here. Low spin loft with a good attack angle, you're going to expect a lower launch angle, and you're going to expect a lower spin rate. And because of all these things, then you're going to see a little bit low on the height as well. So, if we think about it, what do we want to do here? If we want this same person with this same club, let's assume that it's a good club for them, and we want them to hit a high trajectory, well, they need to get their spin loft up. But they don't want to do it through attack angle because their attack angle is already good. So they need to increase lofted impact. Now, could you bend the club a couple of degrees weaker to get that loft up a little bit? Yeah, you might be able to do that. It's one option, but you're probably not going to bend it, say, 6 degrees here to get it up into the screen area. So, this person probably, you could say, maybe has a little bit too much board shaft lean at impact. They just delofted a little bit too much at impact. But if we were able to get them to add a little bit of lofted impact here, yeah, we would see the ball speed come back down here, but we're going to see the spin rate go up, and then also the launch angle go up, and all these things should start to fall into place. Now, maybe they like this. This fits really well with the low trajectory, and maybe they like a low trajectory. Then they're just fine. They don't have to do anything. But if they do want to go to a high trajectory, then in this particular situation, it may not be the club. It may be more about what you're doing to change in their swing. So now let's look at a couple wedge examples here. And again, we're still learning on the wedges. We used as much tour data as we had. We found somebody that collected a lot of wedge data and also used some 3D biomechanics, so we were able to see what they were doing with their body and then also what they were producing with their wedges. So, I mean, we do have a lot of good data, but, we may possibly tweak this if we get more data and as things come in. But let's look at this particular one. Ball speed was a little up, launch angle a little down, spin rate was pretty far down here, and the height still ended up okay. Because of the high ball speed, it allowed the ball still to get up in the air a certain amount. Now, we didn't measure attack angle and we didn't measure spin loft, but again, we still know where those things should be if we were to measure them. So we know that their attack angle should be somewhere around -2.5 or something like that, and that their spin loft should be around 50. Now we're looking at a high trajectory here and a partial wedge shot. This person's hit it further. So remember, we said high trajectory are the ones that go the shortest, low trajectories go further. So it's not hard to get something that goes further when you're talking about a high trajectory optimization. That is supposed to be the shorter of the three. So if this person has more of a flat ball flight, then of course they're going to hit it further than what this says. Now, why did this turn green here? Well, it fits in the height, and it's within this green area or longer. So what we do allow for is that as long as you hit this number or where the beginning of this green shaded area is, as long as you're here or anywhere further, then that's going to qualify for passing for the distance part of the test. And it also passes for the height part of the test. So that is why you do get a green here, even though the trajectory doesn't fall within the entire green shaded area. We didn't want to turn this away from green just because your carry distance wasn't inside of here, because we feel like, well, if it is a club that allows you to hit it further and still get that correct trajectory height, then it should be green. And so, but what do we talk about here? I kind of listed this one as a flyer because when we were collecting this data, generally he was generating a lot higher spin rate than what we see here at 4,800. So this might be where you want to maybe not use a single shot, and you may want to look at more of the averages over time, because if you do get one that you get a flyer or whatever the case is, then it may kind of throw things off a little bit. So that's just kind of one example, just wanted to kind of go over that. But low spin rate, but that was more because there was some grass and dirt in the grooves that caused him not to get a good grip on it. Now if we look at the opposite end, this is the same person that was hitting balls at the same time, and so you can see that he was able to generate a really high spin rate. Now again, we're doing these numbers based off of what the pros do. Now there are going to be other pros out there that hit this type of shot, but these types of numbers are far away from what we saw the averages that the pros do. So this would be kind of a very exception to the rule, but it doesn't mean that there aren't guys out there doing it. So you see a low spin rate, a really high spin rate, really low launch angle. It's kind of that spinner type shot. So again, it falls within the height. It starts either here or greater as far as carry distance goes, so it still is optimal based off of the rules that we have set. And just wanted to show you that, I know there's been a lot of questions about wedges, so you kind of have to play with it, see what you're really trying to get to, but just know that what we set these trajectories at is based off of what we see the majority of the tour players doing. Again, it doesn't mean that that's what all tour players do. And then finally, here's just one example where we did get some club data, and you can see that it fell pretty much right in line with everything. Tack angle was a little bit steeper than what we would have wanted, and so the launch angle is a little bit lower than what we would have wanted. Spin loft's a little bit lower than what we would have wanted. So you raise some of these up a little bit, and it brings the spin rate, the launch angle up just a little bit. Maybe the spin rate changes a little bit depending on how you do it, whether you do it with just shifting how the spin loft is pointed or whatever the case is. But you can see that this one falls pretty much right in line when we did get one with the club date on it. So now let's go look at a driver optimization. And here, if we assume, this is two different shots here, we assume that 1 mile per hour club speed is approximately 3 yards. If we look at these two club speeds, then what would we expect would be the difference in optimal carry? Well, it's about 2 miles per hour difference times about 3 yards. We would expect a 6-yard difference in potential carry for these two shots here. But if we look at this, these are those same two shots, the 111.4, the 113.5. We've got this one that's saying the optimal for max carry is 268. This one for max carry is 294. Now, how could that be possible? How could this one say 268 and 294? We expect 6 yards difference, but not 20 yards difference. If we look at the attack angles, minus 4.2 on this one, plus 4.5 on this one. So again, remember, when it's the driver, it's going to look at the attack angle, see what's possible for that attack angle and for that club speed. So if we dig a little bit further into this negative attack angle though, and we say, let's set it for max total, well actually, it fits in quite nicely with a max total shot. Really low launch angle, really low spin rate. You can see it's kind of right on the bottom edge of that max total, but it does fit in there. So again, depending on the type of trajectory that the person's trying to hit, and this was at the British Open last year, out on the range trying to practice that low driving drive to keep it under the wind. I mean, if that's the trajectory that you're looking for, then these numbers match up quite well, again, if you're dealing with a negative 4.2 attack angle. Couple things on woods with gear effect. If we look at this one, we talked a little bit about it earlier. So we've got a low spin loft here, but we've got a high spin rate, and we've got a low launch angle. So when you see a low spin loft and a low launch angle and a high spin rate, what's that usually mean? Well, one thing that it could mean is hitting it towards the bottom of the club face and getting that gear effect from hitting it below where the center of gravity is. The ball speed wasn't too low. It was 1.46 on the smash factor, but maybe a little bit helped because it was actually a low spin loft, and then that didn't let the ball speed drop too much. So it probably didn't hit it too low on the club face, but low spin loft, low launch angle, high spin rate, very, very likely that that was hit a little bit low on the club head. If we look at the opposite, this was actually with a 3-wood. So this was a 3-wood, slightly off of a tee, just a very small tee here. And so attack angle was good, really high spin loft here, really low ball speed, or a couple miles per hour compared to what the optimal value is, but high spin loft, high launch angle, low spin rate. So just the opposite of what we were just looking at. You can assume pretty safely that this person has hit it high on the club face, and this person definitely hit it high on the club face. So they got that high launch, low spin, because we're assuming that the person's hitting it out the center of the club, and because of that high launch, low spin, you can look over here, see a high spin loft. Remember the roll and bulge on the driver or on the fairway woods as well. That's going to create that higher spin loft, even though it keeps that spin rate down. So just another example of how gear effect, you can really kind of look at the numbers and see how that's affected. So that is it for the presentation portion. We've got about 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to answer a couple questions here. So hang on one second, and then let me get the first question. All right, so the first question here is, do the settings need to be set before the player hits the shots, or can you change them after? Yes, you can change them after. So you can go in there, you can move the balls, so you have to select all the balls from the ball, or all the shots from the shot list, and then move them so that you change the ball. So use the little edit button that's at the top of the shot list, and that's how you would change the ball from, say, if you forgot and you had it listed as premium, but it wasn't premium. So you can, edit what type of ball type that is there. And then you can just go into settings, and then you can change what the temperature and the altitude is. And then from there, you would just want to turn the optimizer off and then turn it back on so that it'll recalculate everything. But yes, if you do forget, there is a way to fix that. So there's a question about how do I get the optimizer option on my iPad TrackMan app. Just go into the App Store and just make sure you have the newest version of the app and it's in there. Somebody else asked about a certain ball, a Wilson Staff E3 Premium Range Ball. I don't know off the top of my head which category that falls into, but if you can send an email to support@trackman.dk with the name of that ball, and then again, if you can maybe take a picture so that we can see the markings on it, then we can get back to you and let you know which category that should fall into. Somebody did ask about a report for the optimizer. It's not something that we have quite yet, but it is something that we're working on. So the plan is to have a report for the optimizer, but there's not one right now for the optimizer. So unfortunately, you may have to just do a screenshot or something like that for the time being until we're able to make a specific report for the optimizer. Somebody had asked, in the iron testing, do you use an average of each club? And if so, how many shots per club beforehand? That's up to you really. I would say from my experience that if you have even a mid to high handicapper, if you have them hit 5 shots and 3 of them are pretty similar, then you're not going to see a big change from the average from those three. So just kind of from my experience or opinion, I would say if you have 3 shots that are pretty similar by a golfer, then you probably aren't going to see a huge difference from there on out. So, it's up to you. Do you want to hit 5 shots? Do you want to hit 2 shots, 3 shots? But I would say around three is a pretty good number. There's a question about classifying my range ball as a medium and that you see really low spin rates, potentially even 3,000 with a 7 iron. Yeah, you may want to look into that as far as which bucket that you're putting your range ball into. That could be a problem with which bucket that it is, a medium ball versus a soft or a hard or even a limited flight ball. Those are all going to spin a little bit differently based off of the testing that we did. So you do want to make sure that you're getting that into the right bucket. So it'd probably be good to, again, send an email to support@trackman.dk with the type of ball and some pictures, and we'll try and let you know which one that should fall into. There's a question about if a golfer can create a higher launch angle with a lower spin rate by having a positive attack angle with a wood, you can create more carry distance. I mean, as far as is that bad? I mean, I think in general, maybe not 100% of the time, but in general, it's probably going to be difficult to make good solid contact when the ball's on the ground. If you have a positive attack angle, you're going to start, generally you're going to start introducing the potential to hit some thin shots by doing it that way. So I mean that's one of the main reasons that we're looking at it. That changes a little bit maybe if they're teeing it up. So I mean if they're hitting it off of a par 3 or something like that, then maybe that changes that thought process a little bit. But we had to kind of come to a few assumptions in order to start narrowing things down. And so that was one of them that we, just decided is that if the ball's on the ground, then in general, your attack angle should be 0 or negative. So, the optimizer will allow it go all the way up to 0, but it won't allow it to go past 0 when you're talking about a wood or an iron or a hybrid or any of those shots that are generally off the ground. Now, of course, there is that exception of balls that are being teed up off of par 3s or whatever the case may be. So there's a question about how do you change the club so that you can have 3 different 7 irons. So what you're going to want to do there is you're going to want to use the tags. So each one will be labeled as a 7 iron, but then you just want to add tags so that you can list, is it the AP2 7 iron or the MB 7 iron or whatever the case is. And so you can add as many tags as you want to that club so that if you're changing shaft or loft or lie angle or whatever the case is, that you can keep track of that. So just make sure that you're using the tags if you want to differentiate between multiple 7 irons or whatever the case may be. Will the optimizer work during a combine is the next question. Yes, kinda. The best way to use the optimizer during the combine would be to do it after the fact. So after the person, because the combine is collecting all the data on every single shot, just like shot analysis is. So it is collecting all the data needed. So I would just wait until after the person finishes the combine, and then you can reload that data into a session. So maybe just close the combine session, then load the data back through the shot library, and then from there you can optimize the data just like you normally would through a shot analysis session. So yeah, there is definitely a way that you can do that so that you can have them take the test, perform in that environment, and then after the fact go back and look and see how optimal were his shots. So here's a good question. Can I use Screencast and Optimizer when doing reports after the event? So that would be a good workaround. And somebody had asked earlier about the report, and we don't have a specialized report for the Optimizer. But what you can do is you can create a screencast, and it'll record whatever's on your screen. And so you'll be able to show the Optimizer on your screen, record that, and then you have something that you can deliver to your student or to your customer that has all the Optimizer information in it. It just won't be in a PDF format. It'll be in a video format where they'll be able to hear what you're telling them after the fact. And then, those will be uploaded to my TrackMan just like the reports are. The person will receive an email saying that they have a new screencast available, and they're able to play that video on any device. So they can watch it on their iPhone or Android device or whatever it is. It's just a normal video file that can be played on any internet-ready device. So that's definitely a good workaround there for being able to get that information to your student. And then the next question is, are all the features available on the iPad? Yep, basically they all are the same. The only difference that I'm aware of on the iPad right at the moment is that you can't really go back and change things after the fact on the iPad. So if you mislabel something or input it as a wrong ball or wrong club, you can't edit that on the iPad yet. That's a feature that we're working on, so you will be able to edit after the fact in the future, but that's really about the only thing that should be different between the TPS version and the iPad version. We're going to do one more question here. So somebody asked about how does club path affect the optimizer, since we assume that it's a zero face to path. If your face to path, if that is within a few degrees, say within about 3, probably 4 degrees, it's not going to have a huge impact. Now, if you're curving the ball, a ball that's curving is not going to go as far as that same shot if it were hit dead straight. If you think about, a string being the trajectory, and you grab both ends of the trajectory, both ends of the string, and pull it straight, then it's going to go a little bit further. So, if you do have a ton of curvature in your shot, then you are losing a little bit of distance that way. So that's really kind of the main thing that you're going to see there. Other things that you have to just take into consideration is that if the face is closed to the path, then you're effectively reducing the loft of the club. So, that's going to bring down your dynamic loft, which is going to bring down your spin loft, which is going to bring down your spin rates and launch angles and things like that relative to a club face that's open to the path. So, you do have to kind of consider that when you're looking at the numbers and you're deciding whether to make a club change or a swing change or whatever the case is. If somebody's got really big differences, say over 5-degree differences in their face to path, you just have to take that into consideration when you're deciding which direction that you want to take that person. But as far as the optimizer goes, it's not really going to affect it much more than basically just kind of that distance number. You could have a really good shot that starts way out to the right and draws back to the target line, and it may be pretty good, but they may not get the distance necessary in order to fall into that green shaded area. But other than that, you just kind of have to know what you're doing with the club path and face angle and what that's doing to the ball flight and what that's doing to the person's dynamic loft, just in general when you're working with the customer or the student. So that's really all the time that we have for today. We really appreciate everybody joining us. Ended up being a really good turnout, and we're glad everybody was able to make it. You're going to get an email, follow-up email with this webinar so that you can rewatch it if you want to. And then we're going to have a lot more coming in the future, and we'll keep you posted. So please send us your feedback. We appreciate your time, and thanks again.